that's the first time I've used it. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6:15 p.m. Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Ms. Mohammed?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford? With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. And before we go any further, thank you, Connor Childers, who's working behind the scenes to produce the board's broadcast on Channel 20. And please, I'd like to remind everyone to hold your questions until the end of each of the presentations. Mr. Siegel, I'm going to ask you to lead with the internal-external stakeholder committee portion of the meeting.
Thank you very much. And I am going to cede the bulk of my time to Mike Phillips to talk about the single most interesting and fun item on this agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. Good evening. Tonight, I'm bringing forward the International Women's Baseball Center has requested a letter of support from the school district on a planned unit development near Bayer School. This would be building a museum campus adjacent to the school on 15th Avenue, an activities center and parking lot on Seminary Street. I think this is a great project for the area. Not only does it improve the area around the school, but the larger Blackhawk neighborhood area. So as part of the executive summary, I've attached letters from the Boys and Girls Club, the Park District supporting the project, as well as a letter from the International Women's Baseball Center to the board requesting support, and then a draft letter from the board and Dr. Jarrett to Mayor McNamara and the Rockford City Zoning Board.
Does anybody have any questions that you get to ask everyone?
Does anybody have any questions?
Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this. I think this is one of those cool, very fun, community valuable things that can draw people together, and in an area of town that can definitely use that attention. So I'm pretty excited about this.
Well, and the reason that they've come to us, you have a mic there, the reason that they've come to us, I mean, specifically asking for a letter of support is because we have a school down there, Bayer, and...
Correct. We're basically, I look at us as neighborhood partners.
All right. Do you have a Springfield update of any sort?
I do have a brief Springfield update. All right, so there's going to be a ton of familiar slides in here, and when I say a ton, I mean all of them, because there really aren't that many. And this is the first year that we have, in a long time, engaged our local representation and our folks who are working down in Springfield. And it was pretty difficult to get down to Springfield this year, and it seems like it's always a tough thing to do because we don't generally go. But fortunately, Springfield came to us. Rockford is unique since we have a legislator from each caucus. We have Senate Democrats and Republicans and House Democrats and Republicans, which I think is valuable for us to be able to hear these various perspectives on issues that pertain to the schools. And while we didn't have a ton of super deep conversation about all the many issues that do affect the school, being able to get the ball rolling, get everybody reintroduced, and have the legislators familiar with coming in to speak with us, I think was a very valuable first step in this work. So these are the rest of the folks with whom we met and when. I do want to point out in particular Representative Dave Vella. This was his first year serving and was extremely enthusiastic and very vocal in his in his work on education committees and about being very passionate about workforce. I think he's going to be a very valuable person in trying to find the best opportunities for our students post-secondary. These have been our top 3 priorities. This is a slide you have seen several times this year. It's obvious that evidence-based funding and anything that impacts general state aid through the Illinois State Board of Education will remain a priority. It was a major success for evidence-based funding to be fully funded again this year at the level that the General Assembly had promised when they passed this new formula. So in discussions with our legislators and with our lobbyists, Michael Cassidy and Amy Ballinger-Cole, they essentially laid out 3 reasons why evidence-based funding was, it hit the level that they had promised. An influx of federal dollars, the closure of some budget loopholes, and better than expected state revenues. And of course, that all adds up to helping us to hold our property taxes in line. So this was another slide that we saw, matching funds from the state for a facilities project. And just one example of how this has worked is House Bill 3563 cuts the local match from 10% for early childhood construction grants from the Capital Development Board to the following: 3% for Tier 1, which I believe that's going to be the slot that we're in, so that's a pretty huge discount for us. 7.5% for Tier 2, 8.75% for Tier 3, and then there's no change for Tier 4. We also had plenty of discussion on COVID relief spending, and we are going to hear that a little later on in the meeting. We have a couple of items on the agenda later on that's going to lay out a significant amount of COVID relief spending. And we will continue to advocate for local development that will generate extra revenue for school funding, and probably the item that we will see most conspicuously will end up being the casino. So this is another slide that you have seen multiple times. And looking at it again today, it struck me that this is kind of unfolds in kind of a neat way. The recommendations have been to use relief funding as much as possible for one-time expenditures. And a lot of it's going to come in the improvement of our facilities. Again, this is something you're going to hear more about a little later on in the meeting. But these are also things that are going to unroll over a number of years, and for a very, very long-term benefit. I mean, these COVID relief dollars aren't just for meeting immediate issues, but they do give us some leverage in solving some long-term problems. So what is next? We will continue to meet with our local legislators. We hope to meet with our federal legislators as well. May not have quite the same priority because they may not have the same impact, but I think it's still important to take our message there. But these are the items that we are going to be focusing on with our local legislators. And for the larger internal, external stakeholders committee, at the September Committee of the Whole meeting, we will be laying out a framework for a calendar of engagements, and that will give everybody on the board a better idea of where we are going, who we're reaching, and how we might participate. And thank you. Does anybody happen to have any questions? I will pass it back to President McCulloch. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Mr. Connor, will you lead the Performance Monitoring Committee portion of the meeting, please?
Okay, we've got items for the 10th and items for the 24th. If you want to look at those and ask any questions, I don't think there's anything that too controversial. There is one thing that is a little news, the facility rental fee waiver by Literacy Council. Other than that, I can't think of a whole lot. A little sad that the Lincoln chimney is going to get demolished. Now, that was sarcasm for those of you that, the few of you that actually probably nobody in this room went to Lincoln. Oh, that's right. Yes, sir. Yeah. I knew there was one other. That's right, a long time ago. Yeah. But, yeah, I feel no nostalgia for the chimney. Any questions?
And the questions he's asking you about, you do know that there's a link under preview of consent items, and all the consent items for those two meetings are listed. Those are the ones he's referring to those two agendas. Just a reminder. Seeing none?
Everybody good? All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rollins, Planning and Development Committee.
So we have two different budgets to talk about tonight. The first item has to do with the 21-22 budget, which is actually the fiscal year that we're in. Just a reminder, our fiscal year runs July 1st to June 30th. So we're actually currently in this year, but we haven't approved the budget for it yet, consistent with what we've decided, how we've decided to handle this going forward. And so the budget for this year, final approval is going to be scheduled for September 28th at our September 28th meeting. We're required to do a public hearing at least 30 days before that hearing meeting, so that there will be a public hearing scheduled on August 24th, 2021. We have gone through the tentative budget before as we built the budget earlier in the year, but Ms. Sather is here to discuss any changes that they've made, the administration has made since our last presentation. So Ms. Sather, I'll just turn it over to you and you can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Good evening. So tonight I'm going to be presenting the fiscal year 22 budget, tentative budget at this point until approval in September. This will be kind of a all-inclusive budget as a whole, as prior presentations you've seen department by department. So tonight is kind of the wraparound, getting us all back together as a whole, preparing the budget and kind of identifying some major revenue and expenditure sources. So the 22 budget was prepared properly aligning resources to support our student needs, as well as kind of living through the COVID-19 pandemic. So some budget assumptions we have here. We do have evidence-based funding, includes our tier funding, our tax levy 2021. We'll see in a couple slides after this. We have new property values included. We do not have consumer price index included. And our CBPRT revenue, our corporate personal property tax revenue, you'll see we have assumed back to 2020 levels. 171 million is our evidence-based funding assumption. This chart kind of shows our funding from 2018 to 2022 when evidence-based funding started, and year over year you can see that as expected our funding has gone up. From 2020 to 2021 we were at a flat funding level, and we are expecting a 10% increase in 2022's levels. This chart here shows us how our funding is actually calculated, where we have a base minimum funding, and then on top of that we have tier funding. So for 2020, if you look in the middle of the chart, our total funding was 156 million. That becomes our new base for 2021, which was held flat or held harmless. And then 2022's funding is our base of 156 million, and we've included 15 million of tier funding on top of that. Property tax revenues, 156 million. This is a look at our tax levy from several years back. 2021 at the bottom is our estimated tax levy. We did receive some EAV and new property values from the county, so we have those included here. We have included again the 6.4 million of new property in our tax levy dollars, and we have not included CPI. So we can see our 2021 estimated levy at this point is 156.5 million. And EAV, how does it affect our tax rate? So as EAV increases, our tax rate goes down. So you can see here, since 2015, EAV has consistently rose to 2.5 billion for 2021 at this point, which is an increase of 5.8% over last year's EAV. This is a look at our EAV in correlation with our tax levy dollars. 2015 to 21, again, EAVs increasing, the yellow bars there, and then our tax levy is the green line in the middle there. Here's our property tax rate trend. So from 2015 of 7.9 down, continuously decreasing as EAV increases. So our 2021 property rate is estimated at this point at 6.2325. And this is an update on our property tax abatements. We're required to update the board on these. So these are the 2 approved abatements that we will see $40,000 of, we will not see $40,000 of tax revenue for these property tax abatements. We've included this new this year in the budget presentation. CPPRT, our corporate personal property tax revenue, we are assuming 24.3 million, which kind of brings us back to a normal year. 2021 was a pretty high year, so we can see the V-shaped recovery here. But 2022's estimate is kind of bringing us back down to our 2020 levels, 24 million. So this is a look at our operating fund revenue by source, $439 million. Federal revenue, to the right there is kind of major funding sources, local, state, and federal revenue. Local basically making up of our property taxes and CPPRT. State funding is evidence-based funding with some transportation and special education funding, and then federal revenue, primarily grant funding, but we do have some other funds included in there. We do have ESSER included as well, and we did notate that this is not the full amount of the ESSER dollars in FY22. We've got 15.8 million that are budgeted in like a capital fund, which is a non-operating fund, and you can see that a little later. For expenditure assumptions, salaries, we have increases based on our negotiated contracts, and all other we assumed at a 2% increase. We've got flat benefits projected here, and supplies and purchase services, we did include a 5% increase for estimated inflation. So looking at our operating fund expenditure budget, 439 million, 66% salaries and benefits. Then we have purchase services, supplies, capital, non-capital. We also have included some new spends for FY22. So these were basically a wish list that was vetted through cabinet and itemized and approved. So here we have $4.1 million of approved new requests that are included in this budget year. We do have some capital requests as well. So the total approved was 12.3 million, which only 4.8 million will be included in 22's budget year. The remaining will go into 23 and 24's fiscal year. And this is a look at our operating funds. We have our projected 21 surplus of $9.7 million far to the far right. And we also, you can see here that we have a balanced budget for FY22 where revenue matches expenditures. This is a look at our fund balances. So for our operating funds, we're required through board policy to have at least 25% of our expenditures in our fund balances, and we currently are at 41%. These are non-operating funds, so internal services, debt service, and capital funds. And to the far, far right, we can see that our FY22 budget for these funds, we have sufficient fund balance to cover the expenditures. And looking at our fund balances, without all of the other detail, we do see here that we've got fund balances that will cover expenditures for fiscal year 22. So that's our budget. Now we're looking at our multi-year projections, which is another aspect of targeting our kind of looking at our 21 and 22 budget years combined. So we did have a deficit budget in FY21 of $9.3 million. We were able to make some reductions to close that budget gap. We also received $10 million of CPPRT dollars that was unexpected in April and May. So we've reallocated those dollars to our capital funds to support some facilities needs. So with that reallocation, we still had a projected surplus of $9 million. We've had more vacancies than expected in our personnel area, and we have additional operating expenditures decreased due to the pandemic. So it's kind of a unexpected item there, but we do have a surplus. As we were looking at the projections for 21, we anticipated a surplus, so we've actually approved some new advanced spends in 21, and here's a list of those. $6.4 million of it were approved to be spent in 21. Those that have an asterisk are not expected to actually hit 2021's budget, so those will roll into FY22's budget and are built into this presentation. So with all that, we are kind of looking ahead to FY23 and beyond. We have some assumptions for 23 forward. We are including evidence-based funding. We're including our tier funding levels. We're keeping our tax levy flat. CPPRT revenue, we've projected a 6% increase year over year. And we've also had some dollars that we're reallocating to the capital fund to meet the facilities needs. So this is kind of hard to read, but if you look at the second column, which is our projected FY21, does this thing have a... kind of towards the middle there, the surplus deficit. There's where we're seeing our projected surplus, $9.7 million for FY21. In the next column over, you'll see that we have a break even, our balanced budget for FY22. And 23 through 26, we're just using those assumptions we built in, kind of where we think we're expected to land, if all hold true. This is a look at our fund balances again for FY21 through FY26, where we can see all of our operating funds at the bar charts there are holding sufficient fund balances to cover expenditures. And reporting back, as Mr. Rollins mentioned, we will have a public hearing on August 24th, and any changes to this will be presented at the September committee meeting, and we'll approve this hopefully on September 28th for board approval. This will also be turned over to the performance committee to monitor monthly and quarterly year-to-date financials. So monthly financial statements, and our treasurer's report will be a quarterly report to measure how we're doing compared to budget. And we'll have a status report for the new investments that were in this presentation to see how those, how things are going with those new investments that we've approved. And with that, I'll take any questions, if any.
Have any questions for Ms. Sather? Mr. Siegel?
Thank you. Maybe not super important, but a curious question. On slide 14, we list the two property tax abatements. Can you refresh my memory on how long those are going to last. I think it's the Six Flags and the Est Wing ones.
I believe they were both 10-year abatements, but I could find out for you.
And do you know if they're like equal amounts each year, or are they graduated in some way?
I'd have to get that information for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. McCulloch?
So on slide, this is it's such a huge budget and there's such a small piece, and I know that we focus on things, but the 22 approved district capital requests, I'm going to ask this in part because when we came in the door, one of the first things that we started doing was building field houses and focusing on athletics, and not that athletics are, but we're doing football field and track at East. And is that just a rebuild, that $500,000 there?
It is. It will be a regrading the football field, and it's their practice field.
It's their practice.
Correct.
That's what I was kind of making sure of.
Yeah.
Because we have the other stadiums. I didn't think we could do a stadium for $500,000, but.
So this is really very similar to what we just completed at Jefferson. So it'll be regrading the football field to make that safe, and then doing an asphalt track, moving away from their pea gravel track that they currently have.
And because we spent a lot of time talking about tennis courts at Guilford, and I see here that we have, $1.7 million or more on replacing tennis courts at Jefferson and East tennis court renovations, that's $500,000. Are those all open or are those gated as well?
Those are gated and locked. And both of those are in very bad repair. At Jefferson, we currently have 8 tennis courts with severe cracking, and it's really creating a safety issue. Our plan there would be to, as we renovate that, reduce that number to 6 courts, which would reflect Auburn and East's court total, and then Guilford would be the larger center where they're holding a lot of their regional play. So similar issue at East, that tennis court has just fallen into disrepair. And
So they'll have 6 as well?
Correct.
They'll be in a line with the others. Do we have them at middle schools? I mean, at one point we had it at West. I don't even know what those look like nowadays, but.
I agree. I do believe we still have the courts at West, but I don't believe they're used. If I remember correctly, the students at Eisenhower use Guilford's. There are a couple courts at the Marshall campus, but I believe those are the park districts. I'm not sure if we utilize those or not. Those are really the only courts that middle schools that I recall.
Well, and I don't know that we have a tennis school school program. It was mostly for like PE classes that they were being used, at least when my children were there. So, and I do raise this issue because we had so much discussion about Guilford and their courts, and are they locked, are they not locked? Can the community use them? Let's do something with the park district. So right from the get-go, what we're hearing is we're going to continue as is, and these courts will be locked other than during the school day or when they're being, I don't know how they decide that, but.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I didn't have a question, but I just sort of had a comment about the environment that we're operating under. If you go to slide 11, so 13 years later, the total value of the equalized assessed valuation of all the property in the district is still $350 million below what it was in 2008. If you look at slide 13, the effect of that is our tax rate is still 80 cents per $100 of assessed valuation above where it was in 2008. And what's keeping us alive really is the increase, the evidence-based funding from the state. And now we're having, huge amounts of money dropped on us by the federal government, although that's for limited purposes. But I would ask the board to keep those numbers in mind, and any relief that we can give to local taxpayers, I think we should really be continuing to focus on trying to do that, because 13 years later, and without even taking into account inflation, we're still behind where we were in 2008 in this community. I spent the weekend with my oldest daughter and her husband up in the Minneapolis area, and I happened to mention, because they were talking about houses, what our tax rate was here, and I don't think they believed me. Our tax rate here is just phenomenally higher than almost any other area in the country, and it does affect our economic development here in Rockford. All right, if there's no other questions on that, the next item, I guess I'm also supposed to say, upon approval of the September 28th, 2021 board meeting, the budget will move to the Performance Committee for monthly and quarterly monitoring. Mr. Connor.
Yay.
So the next item is not current year's budget, but the next fiscal year's budget, because we're already in our current year, and so we are going to be directing the administration to begin the work to start preparing the budget for the 2022-2023 fiscal year. And really, it won't be all that long. It'll be the blink of an eye before we start having to sit through those, I should say having to, before we have the privilege of sitting through those additional budget preparation meetings. Are there any questions or feedback regarding that? All right, hearing none. Let's move on to the third item on our committee's agenda, which is the ARP-ESSER updated spending plan. So the application for the ARP-ESSER funding was due and was submitted to the ISBE in the amount of $154 million. The attached presentation summarizes the tentative plan, which addresses learning loss, prevention and mitigation strategies, interventions, and improving air quality at our schools. I will now turn the meeting over to Ms. Michelle Yar, Chief Financial Officer, to present the ARP-ESSER tentative plan. Ms. Yar. And you can remind us again what that stands for.
American Rescue Plan, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. I had to cheat on that because I know the American Rescue Plan, but yes, I did have that noted for myself. So this we brought forward, if you can recall, we had the public hearing on this June 22nd. We did not have the grant yet. It wasn't open yet, but we had a pretty good idea of what we could spend the money on because it's very much in line with ESSER 2. So that was opened up July 1st. We had 30 days to get it done. So we wanted to bring this back to show you what was in the grant budget that was submitted. And we can amend this throughout. We will have to amend it throughout because our needs will change and things will happen. Just like when we opened up the grant application, we didn't expect $154 million. We expected $144 million. So what the state did was they gave us an extra $10 million. They had a state reserve amount of $10 million that they could choose to do something with, or they could pass it on. They passed it on to us. So that was a surprise. For ARP-ESSER, again, it's very much like ESSER 2, but there is we have to have 20% of learning loss. So I'm going to have Mrs. Detman talk about this. But this is the overall summary of the $154 million. You can see the state reserves. Those are the amounts that we weren't expecting. So we have state reserves for summer enrichment, after-school program, and learning loss. So the rest of the money outside of the learning loss really goes to facilities to improve our air quality. So this is what we have put together so far. This is just a breakdown. Part of this money that comes to us is also due to the charters. So we need to, allocate money to them for their piece of this allocation. So that's just listed here. So it's just showing you how this all breaks down. And then you can see this $36 million for the learning loss strategy. So we have this broken down into strategies as we go through this presentation. Most of the updates have really happened in Mrs. Detman's area. I'll have her talk about that. We built this out over the last, a couple months, and it really, last month, we hit it really hard with having to get this grant application in. So I will pass this over to Mrs. Detman for the rest of this.
Thank you very much. So you can see the overall breakdown of our tentative plan to address learning loss with these dollars. I'll walk you through each of the strategies as we understand them at this time, knowing that our next step is to begin action planning using our PDSA process to ensure we're inclusive of all voices and departments, and that if we need to make amendments as we learn more, as more of our students join us in in-person schooling in the fall, we have that flexibility to make those amendments. Our first strategy is around instruction and community center support. The overall goal in addressing learning loss through American Rescue Plan dollars is to extend the day and extend the year for as many students as possible. So our focus here is on extended learning time to lengthen the day and the year to give students more time to learn. We have a few key ideas with this strategy. First is more summer learning. We were so proud of the 5,000 that we served this summer in our retreats and our camp, but we know that we have many more students throughout our community who didn't participate in our centralized summer programming. So we'd like to expand that and meet students in their neighborhoods more and more. We'd also like to expand our after-school programs and coordinate with our community services and partners. As you know, we embedded some RPS teachers into some community centers across the city, and we're learning now about what went well with that and what didn't go well so that we can hopefully expand on what works moving forward. Our second strategy here is social, emotional, and mental health support. This is both for adults and for students. And as you know, you've approved an SEL screener for the first time, and that will give us some actionable data to direct our resources. Our next strategy is around transportation and attendance. It is a well-known barrier to some of our children for regular attendance in school. But we also know that just removing the barrier of physical transportation might not be the depth of the work that needs to be done. So we'd like to pair that with family support through the use of our family support specialists in early childhood and our parent liaisons in K through 12, as well as building stronger partnerships with our community organizations to really reinforce the habit and the importance of attending school regularly. Our next strategy is around professional learning, and here's where our system-wide framework comes in as well. We'd like to ensure that our priorities for our district as articulated in the system-wide framework are also offered as compensated opportunities to learn, either through salary credits, PDCs, or hourly pay. And so we are working with our Human Resources Department and Talent Development Department to build out a strategy for that. Also connected to this, and this generally speaking comes more from our schools side, so I'll speak on behalf of Mr. Gallagher tonight, is to put our focus on vaccinating students. We know that to really protect in-person time, we need to increase the number of students who are vaccinated. So we have Mr. Gallagher as Chief of Schools working with our Health Services Coordinator, Ms. Sturm, and also our principals to develop incentive strategies to increase those numbers. And really, our strategy here is about protecting that precious in-person learning time. Cybersecurity, who would like to talk to cybersecurity? We also know that in our today's age, we need to protect our data privacy and also just our systems in general to ensure that we have learning continuity, and again, in service of protecting that in-person learning time. So we have a few key ideas here to continue to implement our cybersecurity defense strategies, which you have learned about intimately, to provide a safe, secure, and highly available digital learning environment. We don't want learning disrupted. They've had enough of that over the last couple of years. And then to mitigate the impact of environmental, geographical, and facility risks. So we have $7.1 million devoted to that strategy. And then I'll pass it over to Mr. Phillips for air quality.
Thank you, Heidi. Much like our ESSER $2, we are hyper-focused on HVAC upgrades and replacement with our ARP ESSER, with a goal of air conditioning 100% of our classrooms, with a hope to expand out further into our schools. We will also, during those upgrades, there is an opportunity to replace some ceilings, lighting, potentially walls. We'll also be looking at roof replacements as necessary and exterior door replacements. As the operation team has continued to analyze a strategy behind addressing our HVAC upgrades, we really looked at and prioritized based off a percentage of occupied space that is currently air conditioned, with our schools with the least amount of air conditioning per square foot of occupied space. So we do have schools planned in all 3 summers. And our intent is to bring a more defined project scopes and budgets to the board in October. We do have a estimated breakdown of where these dollars will be spent. $5.3 million in engineering services, 2.9 in program management. We definitely will have some abatement design, testing services. We're looking at spending $94 million in construction, which will include abatement, and carrying a 3.5% construction contingency of $3.3 million for a total all-in cost of $107 million. The intent is to spend all $107 million. So we will have additional projects if our contingency balance, if there's a remaining contingency balance, so we can spend all money within the time frame of September 30th, 2024.
Just to talk about a little bit about that, what Mike just said, his intent is to spend all of it, but we also have to make sure that we spend the learning loss, because that 20% has to be what we are able to spend. So we have to get the 20% in order to get the rest of it. So we have to be really careful about that. So we built in some metrics, so we can really take a good look at this and make sure that we're meeting these metrics as we go, or we can adjust very quickly. So what my team will do is pull the expenditures down. Every single month we're doing this. We're going to actually submit the grant expenditure reports every single month. We're not required to, but we want to get cash flow in as quickly as we can. And these are going to be big dollars going out, so we want to get the cash flow coming in every single month. And plus, we're able to look at this often. So Mr. Phillips and my team will be meeting every month to look at the facilities, and then Mrs. Detman will be looking at her performance metrics. So we have the vaccine strategy. That was, pretty simple. Number of vaccines administered to students. Right now, we're looking at a threshold of 40%, so that we have some metrics there. So I'm building in the metrics because it's part of my duties as my liaison work. So I'm getting ready to pass this over to the performance committee. So my task is to get these metrics in here. So we've done that. We have learning loss strategies. You can see those listed out. These may adjust as we work through things, but this is what we have right now. Air quality status, really, of those projects that were outlined by Mr. Phillips just a few minutes ago. And cybersecurity uptime percentage. And then we also want to make sure that we have additional devices. So Mr. Barthel has 105% of enrollment is what he tries to keep on hand for our inventory. So that is the ARP ESSER. I did include ESSER 2, and you can I'm not really going to present on that. But why I did that is there's some details in here. So you can start seeing the not grants, but you can start seeing the contracts coming forward, and you're going to know what they're for. So these are what we have right now. Again, I just signed off on a grant amendment today, so these things will just change as we go through our needs. And we're going to try to, when we look at ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER, some things will work better in ESSER 2, so we'll move things throughout to whatever makes us realize the most dollars back. So, and we are able to go back on some of these items as well. So I've gone back and captured what we can that we've already spent. So we've submitted those. And then those are the metrics that we included this time for ESSER 2 as well. Any questions?
There are a couple of things that I just wanted to pull out, one of which Michelle mentioned at the end. So there is a requirement that we spend 20% of the dollars on learning loss, and so we need to make sure that we hit that number or we'll lose other numbers. Just overall, I just want to say, so we have to spend $154 million in 3 years, essentially 3 years. My understanding is it has to be obligated by that date as long as you've got a contract signed.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the bulk of this is construction, we don't usually do construction during the school year, especially not like air conditioning or air quality. So really, our target is to get that money spent and get the work done by the end of the summer in 2024. I did want to point out, because I had noticed it and I raised it, on the list of schools for air conditioning, the priority, Roosevelt does not appear on that list. And I don't know if Mr. Phillips, if you want to talk about that.
So there have been some early discussions on, as we move closer to a facilities master plan if we would continue to use Roosevelt as our alternate location. There's been no serious discussions, but I did leave Roosevelt off the list at this time. As Ms. Yar had commented, we are able to amend throughout the process, so we will continue to review where we're going with Roosevelt, and if it appears that we will continue to stay at Roosevelt, we will definitely address that school.
And then the last point I was just going to pull out was on the vaccination rate. They've set a goal of 40%, and that they didn't just pull that out of the air. Apparently, once we hit that rate with our staff, we saw a dramatic decrease in the number of incidents of COVID last year, and so they're using that as their metric to try to get to schools having 40% of their kids vaccinated. Mr. Connor, did you have a question?
Yeah. One, as a review for us on the contingency, might be a term that some on the board haven't heard before. If you could just quickly say that, number one, I'll just say up front that there's industry standards for contingency, so it's not something that we're making up. It's a standard practice. And I think last time we had a number slightly under that that we ended up at. So actually our contingency numbers have been, our experience has been pretty good. So.
Correct, and I believe during the facilities master plan, the contingency was at 3%.
Right.
And these were just estimated cost at this time, so that's kind of where our contingency landed. And basically the intent of contingency is anytime we're doing a construction project, especially renovations like we will be doing, and when we're opening up walls and roofs, and there are unforeseen conditions uncovered, this just allows us to address those items as they come up. As I did state, if we plan well and get somewhat lucky and don't run into any issues, we will have additional projects developed so we can spend those dollars if they're still there.
Another point is that one of the emphasis here has been on air quality, which was one of the big intents with the pandemic. So obviously a huge portion of those facility dollars are going to go for that. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I do want to note that windows and exterior doors were explicitly talked about in both grant opportunities.
Yeah, so these are, I think one of the things I want to point out is that we're following the standard and the intents of the law on all that. Now I do have one comment, which is on slide 11 about cybersecurity. Being our local nerd, and I wish Mr. Bethel were here and there'd be two of us to nerd out on this. But what I would highly recommend that all of you look at is, and maybe some of you saw it, they had something on 60 Minutes called Solar Winds, which we've said a number of times. And, you know, sometimes we look at these events and we become, you know, well, it's just one more thing. One of the things they found is that, number one, they did not catch the, if you will, the instance or the hack for months. And what that means is that in virtually every federal department, there was, they had software laid down that who knows what the result of that is. So I want to remind us how critical this is for us. We did have our incident, and I think a lot of work went into trying to bring us back to normal, if you will. But I want to point out that, number one, this is continuing, and it's by state actors, you know, from various countries that are not good actors who are constantly doing this. So this is something that when Mr. Barthel and I have talked about it, that this is something you should get used to, the notion that this is ongoing, if you will, defense. And it's just, it's to protect things like the privacy of student data, the privacy of employee data. It's to make sure that there's no interruption to any of our systems, including power and so forth, and that would go at a national level. So I really wanted to point out on this one that as a mitigation strategy, it sounds like a lot of money, but this is something I think that's going to become even larger. So I would expect going forward, and as especially one of the things as a board, as we do more educational technology, it is something that we have to be aware that when you have outside functions, that you do open the door potentially to more of this. So sorry to take time tonight, but I really wanted to make sure that everybody kind of highlighted that, because that is something you're going to hear more about. And as an FYI, as a citizen, they don't know the extent to which systems like power, water, and if those of you that didn't know that, there was a tax on the water center in several cities where the filtration was affected by hackers. And they discovered that. So think about your water being essentially poisoned. And so, you know, this will apply to us in a very large way, so.
Oh, Mrs. McCulloch.
I have a couple questions. So a couple of these slides where it says required at the bottom, there's an asterisk, but the asterisk isn't in the body of the slide. Does that just mean, for example, instruction and community center support is something that is required as part of the ARPESER plan?
No, I think that's meant to signal that the 36 million is required to have been spent as the 20% dedicated to learning loss, I think.
Because it's also on professional learning. I just don't understand why a couple things are required and the others aren't, and what does that mean?
That may actually just be an error.
Okay. Another question is transportation and attendance. Early childhood students are included to remove the barrier. ESSER money can be spent for students who are, so early childhood we choose to provide programming for. It's not a state mandate requirement, and we do have some grant money, but we also use Fund 10. So can we use the ESSER money for students who we are not required to serve? Is that part of it?
Yes, that's what we've submitted in our grant application, and so we're waiting to hear back from the state to confirm that everything we've included is allowable.
Okay. You have in here to avoid remote learning. Can you just update us? Are we doing any remote learning as of this moment in time this fall?
As of this moment in time, we have only a narrow set of students identified who would be unable to attend in-person learning. However, these are the same students that would have had health complications prior to the pandemic as well. So at this time, we are not planning to offer remote learning, and we expect to have all students back for in-person learning.
And so for students who are unable to come and are homebound, for example, we only offer an hour a day then, right, in their home?
The minimum requirement is 5 hours a week, and it's our homebound hospital services, yes.
Okay, so when you say we will be continuing to service those students, it will not be with a remote, as we have seen this past year. We will return to pre-pandemic hospital-bound services that you're referring to.
That's our understanding at this point in time, yes.
Okay. In here you have, by the way, you use the acronym PDC real fast, and professional development courses, I think.
Professional development credits.
Credits, okay, thank you. You had to promote vaccinations, and you know, we've kind of had some different conversations about how we can promote vaccinations among students. I was glad to hear what 40% was, because I was like, where'd that come from? But, and somebody told me recently that our teachers, our educated staff, Mr. Zedeker, I don't know if you have the number, are we really up to 83% of our certified staff that are vaccinated? Do you know? Do you have a current number?
I don't. I can look that up and get it back to you, but I do not have a current number.
Okay, that'd be,
I've heard a similar number, Mrs. McCulloch, but I think it'll be good to get it verified.
it'd be, yeah, I was going to say verification would be good. I don't want to, put something out there that's not correct. Anyways, what kind of limits do we have on promoting vaccinations? I mean, and this might be more of a legal question in terms of students not feeling pressured for a vaccination because of an incentive or because another student group is pushing them to get a vaccination, or privacy. I mean, I'm just kind of feeling a few questions from parents who are concerned, and I don't have an answer. What can and can't we do?
I'll let the legal department give the legal definition, but as Mrs. Holdley's walking to the podium, I've been involved in the majority of the meetings where we've been having conversations with principals about this, and coaches and teachers, and lots of building level personnel have been involved. And I think one common element that we think, just as a pragmatic approach, is we want to make sure we are not doing anything where we are passing around lists of who is and who isn't vaccinated, and then using those lists to pressure specific students. So what we're going to really attempt to do is promote general vaccination incentives school-wide or individually, without specifically giving names out of who is not vaccinated. I think that's a clear line that nobody wants to cross, because we don't want to be in a situation where fellow students or staff are reaching out to a list of targeted students who are not vaccinated yet. That is a clear direction that we are not going to be going.
So if I understand your question correctly, can we obtain, you want to know if we can obtain the vaccination status of students at a school level. And the answer is yes, we could also collect that information just like we do other vaccination information from students, and have that available. But that information is closely held by the nurses and other appropriate staff. So it's not distributed school-wide to everyone. It is confidential information, so on a need-to-know basis.
Well, and we would have to have that, because I don't know if the rest of the board is aware, but as we go back to school, the way that we will be looking at quarantining will be, if you would like to explain that for the rest
Correct.
of the group, and primary and secondary are different.
Right. Well, only because students under 12 right now can't get the vaccine. But for students who have been vaccinated, or adults who have been vaccinated, if they're exposed to someone who is COVID positive, they don't have to quarantine if they have been vaccinated. If they have not been vaccinated, then they do have to quarantine. And so we would use that also during our contact tracing and quarantining process.
And if they are quarantined and over the age of 12, it would be secondary school, and it would be asynchronous learning. There won't be remote face-to-face online. Is that correct?
We are still working on our back-to-school plans and our final back-to-school handbooks. I don't think we're prepared to comment on those specifics at this time, but we are, continuing to work with the updated guidance.
Okay. But it will be different for elementary, because they can't get vaccinated yet.
What will be different? They're quarantining. Yes, so we'll need to work on what those protocols are specifically, and that's what we have teams devoted to now, getting ready for the start of school.
Okay. Well, will we be putting out a request for ideas on how to promote vaccinations from groups in the school, or are we?
We do have a plan, and I'll let Dr. Jarrett talk about the incentives.
Yeah, Mr. Gallagher and the principals are working on that right now, but at this point we're looking at $100 incentives for currently vaccinated students, 50 and 50 for students that are eligible who get the vaccine. We're going to really try to target registration. So there's an individual layer of incentive we'll look at. We're also looking at kind of collective success-based metrics for school-wide metric totals, starting at 40%, which we mentioned, but we'd love to actually get
to 70%. That would be the ideal number according to Dr. Martell, but 40 would certainly be a powerful step in the right direction. So it will be a combination of individual incentives and kind of school-wide incentives, everything from food trucks to prom incentives or homecoming incentives, all the way to potentially school-wide investment in the building or facilities, depending on, and we're leaving a little bit of discretion there. We'll create some parameters, but more to come as we get closer to the start of the school year as the schools work together to develop the details.
And we are working with the health department to have folks on at the registration, at our secondary registration, so that the students who want to be vaccinated can be vaccinated and receive the incentive on site.
Thank you. More to come. I know that it's in the future. I think it's, you know, the protocols, back to school protocols. Will that be part of it?
Yes, that'll be part of it.
That's on the agenda for consent. Okay.
Are there any other questions? If there are none, then the ARP, ESSER, and ESSER 2.
Excuse me. I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I just want clarity, especially where it relates to the Delta variant. Will we be reconsidering the remote possibilities due to the increased numbers and the Delta variant? Or have we had any discussion or?
At this point, the state does not provide that discretion. The state has been very explicit that in-person learning is the only option. What we will be considering will be masking policies and other remediation efforts, including vaccination, including masking, including cleaning protocols, distancing protocols, but in-person is really the requirement from the state.
Thank you.
You know what? The other incentive is if they get it, don't they get in the state lottery for the $1 million? So $2 million again this week.
All right, and I apologize. You know, one of the problems is these plexiglass shields, because if my light's on, there's a whole bunch of other lights on down there, and I kind of tune them out.
No, it's all good.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yeah, I'm gonna make this real quick. So on page 5, where we're looking at the breakdown for the learning loss strategy, I was just curious, was there written into the grant like any possible assistance for some of the populations that don't have access to like the Chromebooks? I know that was necessary for this past school year because obviously we're doing remote learning, but do we see that that's no longer going to be a need because everybody's going to be in person?
No, we'll continue with our one-to-one strategy. And so every elementary student will be assigned their device on the first day of school or within the first couple of days of school. That will be their device. So if it needs to come home, it can to support homework. And then in grades 6 through 12, we'll carry on with our take-home one-to-one devices.
Oh, so they still have access to that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Nice. Thank
yes.
you.
We are now a one-to-one district.
Cool.
Until.
All right. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay, the ARP, ESSER, and ESSER 2 tentative plans now move to the Performance Committee for monitoring. So the next item actually has to do with this discussion comment that I had previously about that we need to spend a lot of money quickly. In May 2021, the Board of Education approved using IMEG and Keith Engineering Design for engineering design services for HVAC and related projects that meet ESSER 2 and ARP ESSA funding requirements. Due to the complexity of projects and short duration that funds must be expensed, the district has expanded the team to include Larson and Darby Group, who provided architectural and engineering services during the facilities master plan. The district negotiated a flat fee of 5.5% with the 3 engineering firms for an estimated total cost of $7.9 million. This will come to the board for approval on August 10th, 2021. Are there any questions or discussions on the engineering services contracts? Hearing none, we'll move on to the. Whoop.
Sorry. This is actually fairly quick. Again, for the newer board members, one of the things here is speed, but it's also expertise. Mr. Phillips, if you want to comment just briefly on the necessity of these outside engineering firms.
Yes, Mr. Connor, thank you. During the facilities master plan, we really engaged architects to assist us in the design. Since this is really mechanical, electrical, and plumbing that will be addressed, HVAC upgrades, we did not have any engineering services that we had past relationships with. So it was important to put this out for a request for qualifications to identify potential engineers to assist us. We also do not have the in-house expertise to be able to do this design.
Okay. It's a lot of money, and I just want to make it clear that, and we're also trying to engage locally, I believe, as part of the...
With Larson and Darby, definitely, yes. The other thing I will note is during our facilities master plan, we had negotiated flat fees with our architects of 5.8% and 6.1%. So we really worked very hard to work with our engineers to negotiate a very good rate for the district.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll move on to the next item, services agreement with NIU ED Systems for culinary curriculum support. RPS 205 received a 3-year grant from ISBE called the Career and Technical Education Innovation Grant. The grant provides $450,000 over 3 years and requires districts to create a new pathway opportunity for students. Pathways must align to an area of industry that has a projected growth in employment. RPS plans to create a new pathway that focuses on hospitality, restaurant management, and culinary arts. The services agreement with NIU Ed Systems allows them to facilitate and support the development of a full program of study plan that includes developing a pathway course sequence, early college credit opportunities, industry certifications, and work-based learning experiences. The pathway will be called the Culinary Arts and will be available at all 5 high schools. This will come to the board for approval on August 10th, 2021. Are there any questions or discussions on the NIU services agreement with NIU for culinary curriculum support? I've got a question. My script here says the grant provides $450,000 over 3 years. The executive summary says this is $20,000. Is that $450,000 just for all of the school districts that are getting it? What's the difference in the figures?
RPS 205 receives $150,000 a year, each year for 3 years.
Okay.
The $20,000 is a line item built into the first year of the grant.
And what's the rest of the money going for then?
The rest of the money goes to a variety of items. It will go to stipends for teachers to participate in the curriculum leadership teams that have been formed to work on the curriculum. It will go to supplies for building,
so the total cost is $150,000, but
correct.
But
yes.
This particular contract with NIU is just $20,000.
$20,000. That's
all right.
Correct.
Thanks. Mr. Connor.
Yeah, I think on this one, I was very pleased to see this, and one of the comments I've gotten from the community is that clearly, and everybody's heard this, restaurants and so forth are having a hard time getting staff. So I think this would be a good one for us to really put out some press locally, that we're helping both the local situation as well as the educational part. So this to me is, I think, a rather big deal in terms of some of the local folks, because that is one of the comments I've received, is that it's good to see manufacturing and so on and so forth. But the hospitality folks have wondered, hey, where are we in this? So I think this is a really good program.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next item. Preview of consent items. There are no consent items on the August 10th, 2021 board meeting agenda. The following item will be presented on the consent agenda for the August 24th, 2021 board meeting. RFP 22-04, Strategic Planning solicits proposals for a strategic partner to assist with aligning our strategic plan and goals to our system-wide framework. So if you recall, we've had discussions about the fact that we're going to do our 5-year strategic plan is, I think it's over. It's time to do a new strategic plan, and we wanted to bring somebody in to assist us in that process, and that's what that RFP is for, is to solicit proposals for somebody to come in and assist us with that process. Does anybody have any questions about that? Hearing none, that completes the report for the Planning and Development Committee.
Thank you. I did see, though, on that presentation that there is one of the places, I was just trying to pull it back up, the framework that some of the ESSER money is being used to coordinate that new framework. How is that happening, Mrs. Stetman?
I'm sorry.
Do I need to find the slide?
Potentially. I closed mine.
I will. Align professional learning framework to the system-wide framework to support students. It's 9.
Yes.
Achievement. So we're able to use some of the ESSER money for that.
Yes, we
even
are.
Even though that's something we were already doing.
Well, it's yes and no. I mean, yes, we have identified our priorities through our universal goals and our standards of practice, but we have not yet fully aligned all the professional learning that we intend to do with those priorities. And also, we're thinking beyond teachers. This is for our bus drivers, for nutrition service workers, for everyone who interacts with children. What we heard from our principals in the month of June is that there is a need for some aligned professional development to support the framework for all student-facing employees. So our figure here gives us 15 hours of job-embedded, compensated professional development every year for 3 years.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rollins. I didn't stir anybody else with a question. Okay. I'm going to now present the items for the Governance Committee. First on that is the meeting minutes from 6/1/2021. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to the meeting minutes? If not, is there a consensus to approve? All in favor? Yes, yes. Aye, thumbs up. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. So consent agenda items for the Governance Committee will be for August 10th will be the meeting minutes, the contract purchase orders, the workers' compensation settlement, and the Freedom of Information log. Pardon? The 27th? I saw that. Oh, okay. So we're going to do back to school protocols on the 10th, not the 27th. I can just pull up because you've got the 10th for both of these on your sheet. Sorry, I'm going to go get it myself. Bless you, whoever that was, sorry. Okay, so consent agenda, draft agenda. On the 10th, Governance Committee, we have contract purchase orders, meeting minutes, workers' compensation settlement, and Freedom of Information log. And then on the 27th, we have a meeting minutes, contract purchase orders, closed session minute release, workers' compensation settlement, the back to school protocols, and the Freedom of Information log. Is that correct, or are we moving back to school protocols to the 10th? Could somebody? I'm looking at, okay, that's August 10th, I apologize. Okay. Yep. Yep. Okay. The other ones I read you were for the 24th, apologies. So those will come up at our next 2 meetings. Do we have any speakers? No, we do not. Okay, I don't have to read that. Are there any further comments or agenda recommendations by anybody on the board? No? Head shakes are almost better than lights. They're great. So I would take a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Same sign if you're opposed. All right, good night. Thank you. See you next Tuesday.